Okay, fine. So let's start. So, fine. So any questions? Yeah. Last time I think we did we did a couple of servlets, right? We had the hello servlet earlier and we updated it to use information from when we use the init parameter which are available for the servlet, specifically for the servlet, as well as at the application level also. If we have some context parameters, right, context parameters, we know how to access them, right, from a servlet, how we can access them. Fine. So yeah, so any questions? Yeah. And gone through that. Now I think servlets.txt, if you have gone through it, I think it's written in a flow basically. There is one flow to it, and no, sir, we didn't go through it. Because it actually is going through in a, there's a flow in which it has been done. Okay. So, sir, yeah. Regarding the theory part of the practical part we can cover. It's theory practical, it's basically covering the idea of a servlet, and at the end that practical thing is also being introduced there. Okay, so practical was what we did last time, right? We did the hello servlet thing. Okay. Yeah, and what about the lab thing? Have you been able to manage it? No, sir. Till now, one lab isn't available for the getting, but we will try to install the Tomcat server in your personal laptop. Huh. Anyone else has tried installing Tomcat on your personal computer, whatever? Yes, sir. I installed it. Okay, it's working. You could make it work? No. No, I think just I installed it and connected it, but I didn't run any program. So okay, you haven't written a program. That's the only thing, right? Yeah. You have been able to run it, startup. Have you been able to? I mean, what you have done is installed it as a service, or you went for setup which is using the zip file. No, sir. Install as a service. Acha, yeah. Sorry. 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 Okay, so you installed as a service, right? So you can start and stop the service. That's working. Yes. Okay. You could locate the Tomcat users.xml file in your wherever you installed, na? Okay. Okay. I think what we can do is anyone else has done this? No. Anyone else has done this? No. No, sir. Okay. I think what shall we do this practical part, if you agree? So for the benefit of all, if you could see, you have gone up to a particular stage where you have been able to install it, right? So I think what I'll do is I'll stop sharing the screen, and then you can share your screen, and I'll guide you to how to make it work, right? Creating our first web application, and then if you have downloaded the hello servlet, and we'll make it work. Just see how it works, right? So let's do one. So see, I think by looking at it, everyone else will be able to do the same thing. Okay, so getting to run the first servlet, at least I would like that to happen. Okay, so can we do that? If you agree to share your screen, and I'll guide you actually. So right, is that okay? Yeah, can we do that? No. So we can, the idea is that I want to everyone to see that how you can make Tomcat work on your machine, and how we can create that same application which I've created here. We created something called academic, right? So you can give whatever name you like, okay? But let's create one web application in Tomcat, and just installing Tomcat and making Tomcat to work, okay? Creating that user called admin user, and we can create one admin user. So I would like you to do that, right? Okay, fine. So everyone will benefit. I feel that's what I feel. Okay, at least everyone can go forward and should be able to run Tomcat on their machines. Anyone could. It's not anyone else who has done just the setup installation of Tomcat. Maybe even if it is there as a service, it's fine. Okay. Anyone? Anyone can volunteer for this?
Sir, actually, after 2 years, there is the exam of the HTTP. Only the theory portion, theory exam is there. So today, the practical portion, I think, not able to sir, do it. Yeah, there is a lectures in our Diwali vacation, then I will sir, definitely go the full day.
Okay. No, my idea was like if you have done half the things, right? Okay. Everyone will be able to see that. Is that okay? I mean, that's the only thing. My only concern is that it will make everyone comfortable. Okay, that Tomcat will be working. You can make it work. That's what I just want to show. It's not a difficult thing. Tomcat can be made to work, and how you should be compiling and running the code. I think is there any problem issues with compiling the code? But you will, okay, since you have not installed Tomcat, you would not have the servlet API.jar file. That's the first requirement, right?
Yes.
You can copy, you can download that servlet API.jar from somewhere, and then if it's in the class path, you will be able to compile. And of course, but Tomcat should be installed in order to see that working. Okay. Okay, fine. You want to do it on some other day. Okay, let's see that. So, okay, fine. Then let's proceed then. Okay. So anyone has questions? Yeah, up to this point, whatever we have done, or I'll show the flow again, once again. I'll try to show the whole flow of what happens when you start Tomcat. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So earlier, we know there is something called HTTP protocol, and you have idea about HTTP protocol. See, in that servlets.txt, why I want you to read that is in the initial part, the HTTP has been explained. Okay, to some extent, HTTP has been explained. So that was one reason I wanted you to read the servlets.txt file. Okay, the HTTP protocol, how the format of the request and the format of the response. And yeah, okay, so let's look at it like this. Let's say here is our, so I'll create one. So this you may understand is our server side. Okay, this can be, so inside the JVM, right? So here you have started Tomcat, right? So when you start Tomcat is actually a Java application only, right? It's like, so when you are starting Tomcat, it's like a Java and some application name. So there's an application for the Tomcat, and that's getting started. Okay. So when Tomcat would start, okay, in Tomcat, so wherever Tomcat has been installed, you would have a web apps folder, okay, where the directories, the subdirectories in the web apps folder are nothing but the they correspond to each of the directory there corresponds to a web application, okay, which has been deployed for the server. Okay, fine. So what we have done is we have created one folder called, so under I'll just put it like this. Say we have a folder called Tomcat 9. Fine. On my machine I have done it like this. There is one subfolder under some place, right? So it is under some place. Okay, so there is a Tomcat 9 folder, okay, where Tomcat is installed. So in Tomcat 9 the bin folder is there, conf folder is also there, but one of the folders here is the web apps folder. Okay, so in web apps there are other folders as well, but one which we have created. Oh, we wanted one web application called academic. Okay, so when we have created this folder, yes, this is our web application, right? Okay, so and within academic, what do we have? There is one special folder called web-inf. Okay, within web-inf, what are the things contained in the web-inf? What are the things which are contained in the web-inf? One is the
JSP pages.
In web-inf, okay, JSP pages can be right under the academic also. Okay, here also you can have JSP pages, and of course within web-inf also you could include JSP pages. Okay, I haven't yet touched upon the JSP part. Okay, otherwise yes, I'll show you. It is actually a better idea to put it under web-inf. Okay, and especially there the request dispatcher would also come into picture. So we should understand what is request dispatcher before going into why someone would keep JSP under the web-inf also. Okay, yeah, but what are the other things in web-inf which we have done so far? In web-inf, right under web-inf here, what are the things? So the content here, I'm writing them here. One of them is the file. There is one file called web.xml, and this is our deployment descriptor. And we have seen this last time, the content of web.xml. Fine, web app / web app. Within that we whatever we give the display name. So this is, so whatever this web.xml is, right, this corresponds to the application called academic. Okay, it's my deployment descriptor for the application called academic. Okay, fine. One is web.xml, and then we have some folder also, just like we have the web.xml file. There are a couple of folders. There's a folder called classes. What is the purpose of classes?
You can have Java class files.
The class files, right? So we don't use class path or anything for Tomcat. Okay, when Tomcat would start, it would like, okay, anything related to academic, any classes which are related to academic, if I have to load them, fine, they should be under the classes folder. Okay, fine. So under classes, according to your package structure, whatever, right? So your class files will be should be under the classes. If you are using some libraries, the jar files, right, then it should be under the just like classes, there can also be a folder called name. So these are the important things, three important parts of your web application, web-inf folder rather. Okay, fine. Everything else, anything which is under web academic, right? Academic can contain you. If you have some images, you have HTML pages as well, right? In your web application, there can be HTML pages. So if there are HTML pages, someone can keep it directly under the academic folder. You don't need to go into the web-inf. Okay, if you have something in web-inf, it won't be directly be accessible. Okay, so let's understand, like this is how you have got a folder, right? So this is academic folder which is there. So like academic, there would be some other folders also in the web apps folder. So in web apps, there are other folders like this. For example, we have the manager app, right? There's one app called root also. You might find capital root. all capitals. That is basically a special name. Root is a very special name. Okay, I'll explain that at a later stage. But so root actually stands for the root application. So it's actually slash. It doesn't stand for application by the name root. Okay, it doesn't mean there is an application by the name root basically. But other things are fine, except for that special name called root. Other names are fine. Okay, so you can have other names. Academic is one which we have created in our in my demo last time. Okay, so when Tomcat would start, it would scan this folder web apps. It sees there is an academic folder. So when it finds the academic folder, it would create a object. What is the object which is created? The object is of which type? This is an object of type servlet context. So understand, a servlet context object represents an application. So for every application, so one servlet context for academic. Similarly, there would be another servlet context object for manager also. There would be another servlet context. Okay. As many as the folders in your web apps folder, so many the number of servlet context objects get created. Fine. After looking in, so now when it finds there is a academic folder, yes, it creates one object called servlet context. Here it will say, yes, a servlet context name is whatever you have kept as the display name, that becomes a servlet context name. So you have a method called get servlet context name, which you can use on this. Fine. You have in the web.xml file, whatever content is there, right? So for see, each web application will have the same, have its own separate web XML file, right? So one servlet context, one web XML file. Okay. So if you look at the content of the web XML, I think I'll open the web XML as well here so that you can relate to it, right? Okay, see, this is the Tomcat installation. We have the web apps folder, and there is this academic folder. Oops, sorry, we have opened the wrong one. Anyway, I'll just open first. Let me open, then I'll close this. Okay. Here we have the web-inf. Under web-inf, there is the web.xml file. Okay, fine. So what we have said, okay, this application which is called academic, it has a display name called academic section. Okay, you can have some description. These things you can find, they are available in the manager app when you have a list of all the applications, right? For our Tomcat installation, yes, there these two will be there to identify this application. Okay, fine. Now these context param, whatever you have mentioned, right, they become the init parameters for the servlet context object. Fine. So last time we have used this, right? We have got the JDBC driver class name. You know how we got it. So servlet context is there, fine, that has been created, and we know how to fetch the value of parameters. Okay, fine. So this object has all of these things. Okay, so there'll be other things as well, but yeah. Now coming to a servlet entry. Each time it finds a servlet entry, this servlet entry, whatever it finds, fine. So when Tomcat is starting at that point itself, when it finds a servlet entry, okay, fine. So it finds there are two servlet entries. So what will it do? So if it finds there is one servlet entry, there are two servlet entries. So for the for each servlet entry, it creates an object of. There are two objects which are created, right? One, these are both the objects are of type servlet config. Okay, and the servlet config keeps a reference to the servlet context. Both of them share the same common servlet context. Both of them are part of the same web application. Right? So our web.xml file, fine, every servlet entry which you make, okay, there is a servlet config object which will be created, right? In servlet context, we had the context parameters, right? So for the context parameter, the parameters were managed here, right? Managing the parameters. Same way, init parameters which are there, they will be managed in your servlet config object. So parameters, init parameter, I'll say, init parameter. Okay. So init params are managed in the servlet config. So this is going to be managed by just looking at the XML file. Now, when it is looking at this web.xml, the servlet entry, fine. In the servlet entry, it also finds, let me again relate it here. Okay. So in the servlet entry, it finds a servlet class name. So when it finds a servlet class name, so it says, oh, this is the class, and therefore I need to create an object of this class. So fine, it says servlet name is this, that's a name by which I'll be identifying the object, but the object which has to be created is an object of hello servlet. So it creates one object of. Fine. So here is what is created is the object of hello servlet. So this is the object of the hello servlet. Okay, fine. It creates this object of hello servlet. What will it do next after creating the object? On creating an object of hello servlet, what's the first step? Invoke the lifecycle method on the servlet object, right? So it invokes the lifecycle method of the servlet object, calls the init method here. So when it is calling the init method on this object, it is passing this object as a parameter. Fine. It would create one more because there is one more servlet entry. This is also the object of the same class called hello servlet because we made two entries with the same class name. So this is also a hello servlet. So it all depends on what servlet class you mention. Okay, so two objects are created. When this object is created, this has its own init parameters, right? This was saying, I think there is some init parameter where the value is greeting, name of the parameter is greeting, and value is hello. In the other case, the name of the parameter is greeting and the value is hi. Okay, so that init parameter, different init parameter managed in the two separate config. Okay, hello servlet is the same class whose object is created. When the init method is called on this will, what will be done here? There is one variable for servlet config where it will keep a reference to this object. Same way, when this is initialized, init method is called on this will keep a reference to this servlet config. Fine. So once initialization is done, this is what is the startup going to do for us. So when we do a startup, Tomcat starts, it has managed this kind of a scenario for us. These objects have been managed. Okay, now it is waiting. It's waiting for a client to connect. Okay, now let's see what exactly happens. Okay, so now from a browser, so let's understand this is a browser. Okay, and someone gives a URL. Now when this URL is given, he is connecting to the server here, right? So from this URL, the URL says localhost or whatever. This Tomcat, wherever it is running, the IP address of that, the port number on which the Tomcat is waiting, that port number has been mentioned. Okay, so I had used, because it was on the same machine, I had used localhost. Okay, otherwise you give the IP address colon, it was running on port number 8080. Okay, so 8080 and then slash. Okay, on 8080 I would like you to identify the application called academic. So I said, okay, slash academic. Okay, and then slash, and you give some URL. Okay, for example, if he said slash hello, it could have been any other thing, right? So whatever you give, fine, what it will do, it will look into the servlet context, look at the servlet mapping. If it is hello, right, what does hello correspond to? Yeah, so what does slash hello correspond to? Okay, so for that we may have to look at the, okay, see, first one is identified by my first servlet, right? That's a name. Okay, so if you look at the mapping, oh, we have this servlet name as my first servlet, and this is saying /hello. So when there is /hello, oh, that's the first servlet which should be used. Okay, so it now knows that this is the one which is the first servlet object, that is what is to be used here. Okay, fine. So if you have used /hello, yes, it would have to now invoke the service method, right? Okay, oh, before invoking service method, there's something more which happens. Let's check this now. Now, when a request comes from the server, what's the first thing that should happen? This is a HTTP request using HTTP protocol, fine, or whatever. It may be, may not be HTTP, but there is some request response based protocol. So what has gone from client to the server is a request. Okay, there is a request which has gone to the server. So what the server should do? See, this request has come on a connection. So on this connection, the information which is received by the server, by Tomcat here, in this case, it's the Tomcat server. Okay, the Tomcat is going to create a Java object. So it creates one object. Okay, this we say is the object will be of type servlet request. Okay, I'm currently calling it as servlet request, but even if I put it as servlet, okay, so there is this object of servlet request, but rather actually it's the object of HTTP servlet request. Okay, but servlet request is a subtype of the HTTP servlet, is the super class of super interface for HTTP servlet request. Okay, so here understand this. We say, okay, so it's a object of servlet request which it should get. So it manages a servlet request object, right, in which the information which comes from the browser as a request, all that information should be available. So it will create an object with all that information. Okay, fine. It will also create one more object which we say is of type servlet response. Okay, this is of type servlet response, where you have, it just is encapsulating a buffer. There is a blank buffer which is available in this object. Servlet response has a blank buffer inside it. Okay, so these two objects are managed by Tomcat when it receives a request from a client. So you have one request coming from one client. Okay, these two objects will be created. It has identified based on the URL, it has identified which servlet to use, whether to use this one or to use this one. If it was, instead of hello, it was /hi, it would have picked up the other one. Okay, fine. And then these two objects would be created, and both of these objects would be given to that servlet here by using the service method. So with the service method, service method, fine, these two objects have been passed as parameters so that the service method invocation takes place. And once the service method invocation takes place, whatever code you have written in the service method, that will then execute. What that code should do, okay, or rather what the Tomcat is doing now is, once it finishes, once the service method finishes, it will look into this buffer. Whatever it finds in the buffer, it will try to put this as a response to the client. Okay, fine. Whatever it finds in the buffer, that will be put back to the client as the response. Oh, this is the response. But who is filling the buffer? The service method. It's a service method's job to fill the buffer. Okay, so service method's job is to fill the buffer. Now, how does it fill the buffer? So for that, servlet response provides a method called getWriter. It returns a printWriter object. So when it says getWriter on this response object, there is a printWriter object. When it says out.println to the printWriter, whatever it writes to the print writer is actually filling into the buffer here. Okay, it's writing into this buffer. Okay, and this buffer will be then made of so whatever and when the service method finishes, it finds that whatever content it finds in the buffer, that is then sent back to the browser, and browser is able to display the response to us. When clear about the whole working in this. Okay, see these two things, these objects, these are every time a request comes, service has to be invoked. But before service is invoked, request and response objects are created. When clear up to this point, the flow is clear. Any questions here? Why the different types of objects? See, you should understand here, there are only two objects in the entire thing, whatever we are seeing here. There are only two objects which are whose class definition is provided by the developer. That's only the hello servlet which you have written. Okay, so this one, right, this and these are the two objects which are because of the which you have created. Rest all the kind of objects are the ones which Tomcat has managed for us. Even these creation of the objects, this is you have developed them, but creating the object decided by Tomcat only. Fine. You don't have to write a class to implement the servlet context interface. You don't have to write a class to implement the servlet request interface or the servlet response interface. You don't have to ever do that. Servlet config, none of those you have to implement. They are all interfaces, you can see them. But this is the entire design. This is a pattern in which servlets are going to work. Tomcat is one web container. Any web container is supposed to do or provide this infrastructure. The infrastructure is a servlet context, the servlet config, the servlet request, servlet response. So much work is done for us by Tomcat or whatever the web container is. That you should be very clear. Your job is very simple. You don't have to worry about the HTTP protocol. How do I, what is the format in which that headers are coming to me? I don't have to worry much about it. I have objects which are coming to me. To me, it's a servlet request object which will be ready-made created for me. From there, I use methods to fetch the things. I don't know the format in which those things arrive. Okay, fine. I don't have to worry what is the status code, how do I, whether status code has to go first or last, or what is the format of what is the syntax of the HTTP protocol response. Fine. On this, how the things are sent back to the client. I'm not worrying about that. I'm only worrying about what is the content the client is supposed to see. And I need to put this HTML to him. So put the HTML in the buffer. And then it is the responsibility to properly send it back to the client. That is that of the Tomcat. Clear? So Tomcat takes most of the responsibility. Your job is only, write the service method. Clear? One method, and that service method will be invoked by Tomcat. Tomcat uses the servlet. That's it. Okay. And when it should use which servlet? That's a servlet mapping, right? Which URL corresponds to which pattern. Okay. So URL pattern. Yeah. So clear on the flow. This is the simplest flow which we have. There are more things which will enter into this. There are more kind of components. It's not only request and response objects which are there. And there will be later you will come across filters and listeners also which are managed. There is something called session, cookie objects. Cookie objects anyway are related to the HTTP protocol. We'll see that. But this flow is clear. The objects mentioned here, they are clear.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Fine. So important. What are the what you should be knowing is the methods in servlet request and then the HTTP servlet request. HTTP servlet request extends from servlet request. you should know what is servlet response, and then you should also know HTTP servlet response. You don't need anything else, right? You are only supposed to be writing the service method. Okay, now there is one more thing. There's one more kind of component. Let me introduce the other component into this. Okay, many times what can happen here is you might be writing a servlet, okay, but that servlet is doing some, it may not directly like to write back the response. Okay, the servlet may not be interested in filling the response into the buffer. The servlet can say, let me use some other component which is available, which I have created again. So maybe there are two servlets which you want to work. For one request which is arriving, okay, so user knows that he is only going to use /hello, right? So when he says /hello, the hello servlet here, okay, can say, no, I don't want to write the buffer here. Let me take the help of some other servlet. Maybe there is one more servlet which has been created. Let me take the help of the other servlet, and that other servlet will put the response in the, will fill the buffer. Okay, so the hello servlet, it's not that service method should, when the service method should be writing the entire buffer. Okay, the response should be generated by one servlet itself. So you can actually like to distribute the work in such a manner that, let me put it like this. You have, okay, you understand this flow. I'll show the partial flow now, okay. So from the server side, when the things are coming, okay, you want to define maybe two servlets here. So you have one servlet, okay. So let's say this is the targeted servlet, which is from the mapping, fine. So instead of /hello, let's say there is something called /target. Okay, so this is my targeted servlet. Fine. So this servlet corresponds to the targeted servlet. This servlet basically is the one which does the processing. So I'll call this as process servlet, okay, or processing servlet. So instead of that hello servlet, you have created something like a processing servlet. The processing servlet, when the service method is invoked, is receiving the objects of servlet request and servlet response. And there is a request and a response object. Okay, so maybe what the processing servlet might do is it might look into the request parameters. Okay, there are information available in the request. It does a lot of processing here. Okay, after doing the processing, it says, I don't want to write the buffer. I don't want to fill the buffer. I have another servlet here. Okay, let's call it as the output servlet, which will generate the output. And from here, I want to use the output servlet, and it's the output servlet that should put back the response. Okay, fine. So if we want, if a particular servlet, the problem here is one servlet here wants to forward its responsibility. See, the servlet is responsible for sending a response, filling the buffer, but it want to put that responsibility to some other servlet. Okay, so it's interested in putting it to some other servlet. In that case, it can use what we call as it needs to have a request dispatcher object. So what it does is it should manage a request dispatcher object created for it. Okay, so it says, okay, I want a request dispatcher so that I can dispatch to this particular output servlet. So it will manage a request dispatcher object, and when it manages the request dispatcher, in the request dispatcher, okay, first manage the request dispatcher for this, and to this request dispatcher object, it will invoke a method. So there are a couple of methods in a request dispatcher through which it will make the same request and response available to the method over here. Okay, so this request dispatcher will be in turn invoking the service method here. So you have a service method invoked on this. The service method says, let me manage a request dispatcher. And then the request dispatcher, so it has to do two things: manage a request dispatcher for a particular resource. The resource could be another servlet. Fine, there can be any some other type of resources as well. So it manages the object of request dispatcher. So this is the important object which we want to look at. It's called the request dispatcher. Okay, so we need to manage a request dispatcher in that case. Okay, and the request dispatcher object can, so this request dispatcher object can in turn, okay, it has got two methods here. Okay, request dispatcher has a method called forward. This is the one which is most commonly going to be used, and another method called include. And the parameter, okay, the parameter are the servlet request and the servlet response. Okay, so there's a parameter for servlet request and there's a parameter for the servlet response. Both the methods are like this. Okay, and so two methods available in request dispatcher. Okay, but the whole idea is, how do I manage this request dispatcher? How does the first servlet say, oh, I want a request dispatcher, I'm not going to give a response here, I want to create a request dispatcher. Okay, fine. So when it says I want to use a request dispatcher, right, there are two ways a request dispatcher to be created. One recommended way, I'll put it one recommended way. The recommended way is to use the servlet context object. So we have a few methods, a couple of methods in the servlet context. Okay, fine. So, okay, I think I'll put them in the notes here. Okay, I'll put it in the notes here. Okay, how does it manage to have a request dispatcher? Preferred option, I'll put it this way. So in the preferred option, use method on servlet context. So servlet context. Now I'll put the methods of servlet context. So we have a method, public method, returns the object of request dispatcher. Okay, one is the get request dispatcher, and you pass a string which is your URL. Okay, this URL, I'll explain how the URL should be mentioned. And another one is you have the method name, and you don't pass a string, you pass the servlet name. Get named dispatcher. So when you're saying get named dispatcher, what do you think should be passed as parameter? The servlet name. Okay, fine. So let me put it like this. You might have a servlet entry like this. Okay, I'm showing part of web.xml. Okay, it's not the whole of the web.xml. I'm only showing the servlet entries. Let's say we have a servlet entry like this. Okay, servlet name, and that name of the servlet is okay, name1. Fine, or I'll call it as servlet name1. or maybe you can even use a hyphen, then also it's okay. Okay, slash. Okay, this one may be having the this one is okay, servlet class, and you got I'm just I don't want to use a package name and make it big, so let's like keep a smaller name here, or okay, we can even keep that package name. Okay, org dot rolwala dot servlet dot target servlet. Okay. Okay, so you got one servlet which is like this. It may have init parameters and it may have some other options. That's fine. Okay, but and then we have the slash servlet. We have the servlet and the slash servlet, in which here let me keep now one more name. Okay. Oh, this is I'll put the servlet class. Sorry. Okay, so your servlet name is not, you cannot have two servlet entries with the same name. Okay, so this is servlet name 2. Okay, and this is not the target servlet, or okay, I'll use the name instead of target, let me say processing. This is the processing servlet and this is the output servlet. Okay, now see one thing, as far as the URL pattern is mapping is concerned, servlet mapping, you might have just created the first one. Okay, and you have given a URL pattern and you have said okay, slash. Okay. I just said slash process. Okay. Suppose this is what you have done. You have not given a mapping for the second servlet. Second servlet, no mapping has been done. Okay, fine. And let's talk about the service method. We call it processing servlet, right? Yeah, it's called the processing servlet. Okay, fine. So let's look at the sample service method. So I'm just showing the part of the service method. Public void service. Here is servlet request. We know this is how the code is. Okay, fine. So now here some processing. Okay, so it wants to do some processing. It has finished the processing part. Okay, now for giving the response, it's not taking the responsibility but wants to delegate it to the output servlet. Okay. So how do we do that, right? So for that, it should do request dispatcher. Okay, I'm just calling it as dispatcher equals, and here you will have the method called get servlet context. You know, this is available always, Fine. If it's a generic servlet, you'll have this method called getServletContext dot get. What should I be doing? Get. It's a named dispatcher that you can use. And what's the name? Oh, yeah. What's the name? This is the name. Use whatever you have mentioned in the servlet name. Get named dispatcher. You know, whatever you mention in the servlet entries, an object has been created for them and they are all identified by a name. See, your servlet, each servlet entry results in creation of an object, and each of those objects is identified by a name. Okay, so you can use them. You can say, okay, give me a request dispatcher so that I can give the control to the servlet name to whatever the servlet by servlet name to. So get name dispatcher. This is how it creates a request dispatcher. And now how do I give the control? So this is like I get a request dispatcher. Once I've got a request dispatcher, then I can pass control to the output servlet by using dispatcher.forward, and I have those request and response objects. And pass the request and response objects. Okay, so whatever is there in the service method of output servlet, that would be getting processed. Okay, so this is what is to be done. Fine, clear. Using a request dispatcher to forward to another. So how do we use? It's by using forward. How do we manage a request dispatcher? One option I have shown here is what calling the method called get named dispatcher. In this case, for the output servlet, I cannot use get request dispatcher method because there is no mapping for it. I have not created a mapping for the second servlet. You can always do this. Okay, you can have servlet objects created, but you may not have created a mapping for them. This is also perfectly fine because they are going to be used indirectly. I don't want someone to directly be accessing them. Output servlet, no, it will always come via processing servlet. Some other servlet can be passing control to this output servlet, not directly. Clear? Because it cannot be, see, if once I give a mapping, that means I'm allowing the client to have a URL by which he can access this particular servlet directly. Okay, but here I am not interested in having someone directly accessing the output servlet. Client is not directly accessing it. When client accesses the processing servlet, it's a processing servlet which decides to use the output servlet. Clear? Named dispatcher is fine. Get named dispatcher method. Okay. Okay. Now, suppose, okay, so two methods. Now, this I had just shown so that I can show you why named dispatcher is required. Clear? You access by name only. Okay. Whereas this is one where you can access by URL. Let's see how we access by URL. So for accessing by URL, maybe you have one more servlet or for which there is a mapping which is done. So if you have a mapping also done, okay, or even for the same one, okay, so we said, okay, there is a name 2 for which the URL pattern is saying slash. So this is pattern saying slash output, right? So when it says slash output, okay, the other way to use it would be, okay, this is one option, how to create a request dispatcher. Okay. Other option would be, so either this or this. In the other, it is not named dispatcher, but you can be using the get RequestDispatcher method, in which case what do we specify here? /output. Okay, so you won't be using both of them. I have just repeated. Okay, you need to comment one of the two things. Okay, but this one requires that there should be a URL map, servlet mapping, then you can use it. Okay, this can be used even without a servlet mapping. Okay, so don't get confused that I have done it twice. Okay, fine, it should be clear to you. Okay. Okay, fine, so it's not both of them but one of them. Okay, and this is how you actually give control. This is managing a request dispatcher and then passing the control to it. Okay, let's see what is the difference between forward and include. Fine. This is clear, or any questions? Yeah. What is a request dispatcher? The idea of a request dispatcher is servlet 1, fine, wants to do some processing and then give control to the second servlet. So servlet 1 will not touch the response. It will only use the request, maybe from the request do some whatever it fetches information from the request, do some local processing, and then says, okay, I have done the processing, you do the please do the output. Fine. So the output servlet will do the output. Fine, clear this part? Passing, so responsibility distributed between two servlets. Once servlet 1 does processing, servlet 2 does the output. So in servlet 2, it will be using that response dot get writer and then do that println on that writer. Okay, the idea is clear? Yeah, any question? Yeah. Okay, so now suppose this okay, so we have the fine, we can, one is the forward method and there is one method called include. But before moving to the forward and include method, let me also introduce a few methods of servlet request. Okay, fine, so put some methods of the servlet request. Okay, okay, now see, the idea here is servlet 1. Okay, I am calling servlet 1 and servlet 2. Servlet 1 is the one which is doing processing, servlet 2 is the one for output. Okay, servlet 1, okay, Okay, fine. So it has got some results from processing. How does it make it available? Results. How does it make it available to the second servlet? That's the whole idea. Okay, so for this, fine, what we have here is, okay, so for that reason why we have these methods. Okay, I'm just showing the purpose why we have such a method here. Okay, so servlet 1 has done some processing, it has some results, and I'll go up and do the changes in the method if you want. Okay, I'll show you what changes could be there. Okay. Let's say result is some kind of an object. Okay, so from processing, so you got some object called by the name result. So there is some, what could be the type? Type could be, so you have a class called result, maybe. Okay, there is a class called result. Let me assume there is a class called result which you have, and the variable name is result equal to, and some processing. Okay, so some processing creates a result object. Okay, so now what should it be doing? Okay, so what we have here is, we have the request object, request dot, we can say set attribute, give a name, okay, and pass the result object. Just give the result object. So what we have option here is, in the request object we can put some objects there. It's like, okay, I want to set up some objects and keep them with the request. Okay, because how it is useful is, when I create this set attribute, okay, the request dispatcher, fine, is used for passing control to the other. When I'm passing control, I'm passing the same request object. See, in this request object, I have updated, I have set up an attribute, and then I'm passing control. So before I pass control, I can set up the attribute. Okay, and the other service method, okay, so other service method, so it will say public void service, okay. So in this, what it can do is, I can say, okay, I have the result is equal to, and cast into result, and you'll have the method called, oh, you got the request object, request object, get attribute, and the name is, so whatever name by which the attribute has been saved, by using the same name, the next servlet can use the get the result, and then it will have the find the output it has to give. So for giving output, it will manipulate the response. Oh, and this I should keep it here maybe. Fine, is this okay? So the way it has to do is something like this. You'll have to do the casting, because request.get attribute, let me put the method names now. Okay, I'll put the methods. So there is a public method, returns void, set attribute, takes a string, attribute name, and object. Okay, so anything, any result, whichever you have, whatever the type may be, okay, so that can be given. This is one method. Another method returns object, return type is object, get attribute. That's having a string for the attribute name. Okay, another method is returning enumeration of string, get attribute names. And there's yet another method, returns void, remove attribute, string name. So you can, managing objects on a request object. So servlet request can manage objects for you. We call them as attributes. So you can keep any kind of object in your servlet request object by using the set attribute method. And you can remove it by the remove attribute method. And the second servlet which needs it will use the get attribute method to fetch the object. You should have the same attribute name. Okay, so we manage it with the name by giving a name. So give a name and store your object. Okay, use the name to fetch that object. And what are all the various names by which there are objects stored in a particular servlet request? This is the method to do it. Get attribute names. Get all the attribute names for me. Okay, and so this is the way you manage the attributes. Okay, fine. Another thing, now some more methods. Okay, let me use some more methods of. Okay, so there are some more methods of servlet request, and those methods are like this. We have method for managing parameter. Not managing, basically there are parameters available to fetch parameters. Get parameter, method returns a string. Okay, takes a string for the parameter name. Returns I think this is again enumeration. I'm not sure. Enumeration of string. A map of string, comma, string array. That's a get parameter. Yeah, these four methods relate to parameters. Okay, now what are parameters? You know about HTML already? Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Okay, in HTML you have created form?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so form/form. Okay, what do? You use input, right? Input type equal to, and many times you'll say input type equal to text. Okay, what else? You'll say name equal to, right? Name equal to, and give some name. Okay, so for example, I say name is username, and there can be some other attributes. I'm not putting them here. Okay, so you can have input like this, input type equal to text. There are other types as well, right? So I'm talking about all those things. Okay, input type equal to maybe someone says password, name equal to password. So these name, whatever name you use here, right, that's what is a parameter name. So when the form is submitted, right, if the form is submitted, there are other things in a form. Okay, right? For example, in form, what else do we put? Target equal to, what is target in a form? In HTML, have you created form?
Yes, sir. We use method and action.
Okay, sorry, not target, sorry, action. Yeah, correct, that's correct. So what is action?
Basically, where the forms could be submitted.
Okay.
Like a package.
Okay, so that would be a URL basically. Okay, so this URL corresponds to the URL. Fine, you have a URL / process. Here you only say process. Okay, fine. And method equal to will be get or post normally. Okay, so that you can always specify. I am not putting here, but and that you understand. So this is the targeted servlet. Fine, this is for targeting. So your target, where this form should be submitted, it should be submitted to the processing servlet. So / process is your mapping, right? Servlet mapping says / process. So this will target the processing servlet. Okay, so in the processing servlet, when this request goes to the Tomcat, what Tomcat will do is it will say, oh, I find username, right? So this is the name of a parameter. This is taken, this name what you use here is taken as a parameter name. I understand this name is not necessarily unique. When someone, what is required to be unique is ID. If you say ID equal to, that should be unique, but name is not necessarily unique. Okay, so in my request which I have got, I can use a parameter name to fetch the corresponding text which the user has entered. Okay, fine. What is the corresponding password which the user has entered? Suppose in the same form, for some reason, okay, it may not happen, but for some reason it so happens that I have got name equals to username. Again, I get it again. So there's no one to stop you from this, right? Or is the reason why this might happen. Let me explain. So you might have one parameter name but multiple input boxes. Find multiple input boxes carrying the same name. That means for one parameter I'll have multiple values. Okay, when you understand this get parameters, that method, it's used because your parameter may have multiple values. That's why it's a string array. Fine. I'll give a small example. Many times, you might be creating a form which may look like this. Why multiple values are, it's not uncommon to have multiple values. Okay, username was a bad example, but many times you might have some entry form, okay, which may look like this. There are some columns. Okay, so there is a tabular data. So if there is a tabular data, right, this is my field 1. Okay, this is my field 2. Okay, and there is a tabular data like this. I am not given proper names to the columns, but let's say field 1, field 2, field 3, these are the column names, and there are, this is a table kind of a thing, and there are multiple values which are represented. So what you might have done is this one, and all the ones in this column, they all get the name as field 1. Suppose that is how you have done that. Input type equal to text, name equal to field 1 for all of them in this column. And same way for all of them in the second column, field 2, this is field 3. So you can have one fine. So what you will be able to fetch when someone submits such a form, okay, when such a form is submitted, okay, and if you say get parameter name, get parameters, okay, and if you ask for field 1, what you should be getting? A string array, okay, field 1 values. So field 1 value is equal to this. So in the field 1 values, 0th will be this, 1 will be this, 2 will be this, and so on. Okay, so you may have form with a form where same field name, same input name, okay, the input boxes and same name is repeated multiple times. So that also you don't worry, you can always fetch all of them. Fine, got the idea? If there is tabular data, you might need this, okay? So that's this method. Okay, and if you ask for this cat parameter map, you get the map basically. So you can, in this you can see each field name, okay, each parameter name and the corresponding values, multiple values for that parameter. They are available in one single data structure as a parameter map, as a map here. Okay, and so these are for submitted, anything which is submitted form which is coming from the client, or they can be. So in that submitted form, whatever parameters are there, fine. One option is you submit it as a form. Other option, other than form, what is the other manner in which parameters will come? When they can come from URL, in what manner? I'm just using something, okay, colon 8080 slash, okay. So that's my URL. It is corresponding to a servlet, and then I say, oh, question mark param 1 equals value 1, and okay. So even from URL you can get. Clear? When you get the idea how parameters are available. So those methods which I have mentioned here, okay, they receive values like this. So if the service fine, in the service method, when the request is received by the servlet from there can use these methods to fetch the parameters. So parameters available through the servlet request object. Okay. So fine. So this, see this part, whatever we have seen, getting a request dispatcher, even servlet request also has a method called get request dispatcher, but that's not a preferred way. The preferred way is to use the servlet context. Okay, you will even find a, okay, so I'll add one more method, because when I was mentioning about a request dispatcher, right, service method, okay, two methods available in servlet context, right? So preferred option is this. Another option, okay, but not the preferred one. Okay, So one method available here, and that method is public get request dispatcher, and you pass a string URL. Now this string which you pass is a relative URL. Okay, fine. So don't use a slash here in the beginning. Don't use a slash when you write the URL here. Okay. Fine. Here you should be using the slash. When you say get request dispatcher, use a slash in the URL. Okay. Name dispatcher we understand by name, and this will be like this. Okay. So this is a method from servlet request also. So two ways. Servlet context can be used, or servlet request also can be used for getting a request dispatcher. Request dispatcher we understand for passing control to another resource. And that resource means another servlet, basically. Okay, fine. So this is servlet. Okay. Servlet request. Some common methods is what I have shown. Okay. Extends from. Okay. So HTTP servlet request extends from servlet request. Okay. So all methods of servlet request will be available if you are saying HTTP servlet request. Fine. So we have all these attributes, parameters. Okay. All those things are available. Fine. Additional methods. Actually, see, that's the reason I wanted you to go through servlets.txt. This all is mentioned in servlets.txt. I have mentioned it. So HTTP servlet request, it has the additional methods. Okay. So now this is specific to the HTTP protocol. So it will have method like get method to know the get or post or put or trace or delete, right? All those methods which are there, fine. Those are the HTTP methods. So that you can find in a request which method, by which method this request has come. What's the method in the request? Okay. Fetching parameters. I think, okay. Let's open the API. I'll open the API. You have questions, you can ask anytime, okay? So you can interrupt and ask questions. From this, web apps, we have the docs. And here, docs, we should be able to manage. Here is the index. Okay, we have the servlet for Java docs, and yeah. So we are now moving to the javax.servlet.http, and in javax.servlet.http you have the method called HTTP, this interface HTTP servlet request, the methods here. Okay. authenticate is, okay, we can change see that later. Get auth type, authentication related things. One of the things, okay, we will have to move to the cookies. Okay, there are some of the methods like get context path. Okay. Yeah. So what is a context path? So if I say get context path, what do you think it should return? In our case, in this case, yes, in our case, because we have used the request which you sent, you said slash academic, right? Slash academic is the one which is identifying my web application, so it says fine in our case here. Okay, and same way, just like there is a context path, okay, I'm showing other related just from the URL part. Okay, so you have actually, you can get the whole URL which the user has used actually. Get method, fine, this we understand, get post or anything put. Okay, now this method get part and get parts, these would be useful if you have a file upload kind of a thing. Okay, if there is a file upload which you are doing, in that case these parts are going to be useful. Get path translated returns a string, get path info. Okay. Yeah, this path info, okay, this is going to give us the slash hello or something. I think it should give the whole thing slash. Okay, if you got some question mark, those parameters, right? So get query string can return that query string part. Okay, whatever it is, after question mark in the URL. Query string, same way, get remote users, okay, that is fine. That's also related to authentication. When authentication is done, then you can use. We will be talking about the cookies and HTTP session. Okay, get request URL, this one, yeah, returns a string buffer. Remember, this is returning a string buffer. This is giving us the entire URL. Get request. And okay, that entire thing. So whatever you have written in the URL box, that entire thing is available as a string buffer. And one more thing, when it is giving a string buffer, remember this is a string buffer, that means it can be manipulated. Okay, so you can make changes to the string buffer, and if you forward this, okay, after making you are receiving a servlet request. In the servlet request, you are saying, okay, get me the request URL. You make changes to this request URL. You can change, instead of saying localhost, or instead of /academy and /hello, maybe even the /hello, someone might even append something though it was not received from the client. You may, the first servlet may make changes to this, and it just passes it to the second servlet. And when the second servlet says, okay, from this request, let me see the parameters, and if you have appended some parameters here, they would be available to the second servlet. Okay, so second servlet is going to look at this same request URL. So you can use the get request URL. It's a string buffer. It's an updatable thing. Okay, you can make updates to it. Okay, and so first servlet says, okay, get the request URL. It receives a string buffer. It makes the changes, and then later it is doing a request dispatcher and forwarding the request object to the second servlet. So second servlet, when it says get request parameter, fine, anything changes done in the parameter list is available with question URL, the query string also. So if you have updated the query string, that will be seen by the second servlet. So second servlet may just say, okay, I'll look at the parameters and then decide what to do. So you can, okay, so you get a lot of control here. Okay, yeah, this servlet path, this is where it identifies. Okay, so in this case, like if I say get servlet path, okay, so in our case here, returns /hello. So this is what identified the servlet. Okay. Get session, yeah, that is related to HTTP session. Trailer means is okay, these are fine. These are all related to the session part. Login, logout, no, we don't want to be using them currently. Okay, I think there are okay. And also we have the lot of headers, each individual header you can have. Okay. So methods to fetch headers, which are the methods? Get header by using name, get header names, you'll get a enumeration. Okay. And get headers returns an enumeration of string for a given name. Yeah. Okay. You know the header name, and you can ask for the corresponding headers value. Okay, fine. Now I'm not listing the other methods here currently. Let me, along with this itself, let me put a few other methods. There's a method to return int. Method name is getIntHeader. There's also another method, I think it returns long or date object, I'm not sure. Get date header. Okay, all three methods are same. Basically, what I want to show here is all the three methods are same. Okay, for a particular header name, fetch the value. The value can be fetched as a string, but if you know that the value is an integer type, fine, then you don't need to say first fetch it as a string and then use a parseInt method. Directly you can ask for get int header. Okay, or this is a date type, the header is for a date. Okay, fine. So for example, it says header is last modified. What's the last modification date? Okay, so fine, so it can just return a long. What is this long? In java.util package there is a class called date. One second, what is the get date header returning? It's returning long. Yeah. Okay, so use the header name. So these two are convenience methods for first one. In case the type is a int or the type is a date. This long can be used to create a date object. Okay, this can straight away be used and you can create. This is time in milliseconds basically. Long is your millisecond values. Okay, fine. Other methods are fine. The again related to header was get header names and other things. Yeah, get header names, get headers. So one header having multiple values, even that's also possible. Okay, so if one header has multiple values, you can get it as an enumeration of string. Get headers. Okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, fine. So clear up to this point, then we can move to cookies. So these are about HTTP basically, and these are methods specific to HTTP because headers they are according to the HTTP protocol. We find them in the HTTP protocol. Okay, earlier whatever methods we had seen were not specific to HTTP. It could be any request response protocol, and you will have parameters in that protocol. Okay, you have method. Okay. Your method like get scheme, so whether it is HTTP or HTTPS is secure. All such methods are available even with servlet request. But these are HTTP servlet request. Okay. Okay. Now, next thing is about cookies. Let's see. So, what is a cookie? Actually, I feel like just going into the servlets.txt and you can read it from there also. I'll show you where it is in servlet.txt. Get method, get cookies. Yeah, returns a cookie array. So what is a cookie? You have done something like this many places. When you do a login, right, it may say remember, fine. So if it is asking you to remember, there might be a checkbox before you do a login whether you would like to remember this. So when you say remember, who is remembering? It is the client who is supposed to remember. Okay, it is the client who is remembering. Cookies are on the client side. Client manages the cookies. I think you know this, that in your browser, cookies are managed. Cookies are managed within your browser, right? So as you visit various sites, many of these sites are actually storing cookies for on your browser. Okay, so what see when a particular okay, I try to explain here. Yeah. Okay. Here is some server, right? When you have this server, yeah, how do you access this server? By putting a URL. So here is a URL. Okay, fine. So when you use a URL, fine, in the URL you identify the server. So you are saying host colon port number. The important part is host. Okay, port number doesn't matter anytime. And then you have slash, and this is a URL part, right? Whatever it is. Okay. So now what happens is, whenever you are keying in a URL here, okay, fine. If you understand, the server, the browser here has to send a HTTP request here. Okay, but each time when it is sending a request, it's a HTTP request it is sending. What it does is it always looks at it. It always looks at this URL, checks with the cookie database. You can say there is a cookie database. Okay, in the cookie database there are two ways the cookies are managed. There are some cookies which are at the host level. Oh, for this host level cookies. Okay, so there are cookies which are stored for the host. Oh, whenever this host is there, these are the cookies which is asked me to remember. And there are cookies which are at the URL level. Oh, for this host a particular URL is there, and if this is the URL, oh, these are the set of cookies. So host wise cookies and URL wise cookies. So before a request is going here, okay, so before it sends a request, you have keyed in the URL, given it to the browser. The browser will check the cookie database. Okay, do I have any cookies for this host? Do I have any cookies for this URL? If I have, I'll add them in this request. Okay, so the request is sent with the cookies. Okay, but one question will arise: how does the cookie enter in the first place? How does a browser decide to store a cookie? Why does it decide to store a cookie? But that happens because in your some earlier visit to this server, okay, here is a server. When you visited the server, when it was sending a response, as part of the response, in the response there are some headers, okay, to set the cookie. Headers to set cookie. So it has set the cookies by using the headers. So when your browser receives certain headers which asks it to store the cookies, the browser is managing it in its cookie database. Okay, so cookies managed on the client side. Cookies are managed host wise and URL wise. Okay, when I say host, it means the server. Fine. Whenever any request will be sent, always it will check if I have any cookies for this particular host, or I have some cookies for this URL. If I have to add them in the headers. Okay, whenever I receive a response, so browser is doing all this all the time. Whenever it receives a response, if there is a header to save a cookie, it will save a cookie. Fine. And we understand that in our browsers, we normally have cookie management available to us. So you do have control on, okay, you want to get rid of certain cookies, you can just remove them. Fine. So what is a cookie? It's a key value pair normally. If I talk of cookie, right, a single cookie is nothing but a key value pair. And key is the cookie name. We call it as the cookie name. Cookie name is the key. Cookie value is the value. Okay. So what happens is when a request comes from the browser, so on the server we understand it is creating our servlet request object, or it is rather creating a HTTP servlet request object. So when it is creating the HTTP servlet request object, it is also examining the cookie headers. If there are cookie headers, it creates an object of the type cookie. So we have a class called cookie. Fine. And you will, so if there are any cookies, you can ask for them. We have a method called getCookies. HTTP servlet request has a method called getCookies. It returns an array of cookie. Okay, so that's how you can look at the cookies, right? What are all the cookies I have? So server will find the cookies which it has earlier asked to store on the client. So client and server, that's how it works. Cookies is a useful piece of information, right? Exchange between client and server. Basically, the client is sending cookies to the server, but those cookies have been actually managed on the client by the server only, okay, because of some earlier things. So you actually have methods in servlet. In servlet request, you have a method called getCookies, right? So servlet HTTP servlet request has method called getCookies, whereas you will have a method called addCookie. Okay, so we have this method in the HTTP servlet response. So from the server side, you are basically writing the server side. So from the server side, when you wish to track the client, or you want the client to remember something for you, okay, you can use the method called addCookie. You need to create a cookie object. So there is a class called cookie. Fine, we may have a look. Cookie is also is a class. This is on the javax.servlet.http package. Okay, fine. So we can, if you want, we can just quickly look at the cookie class at the HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response methods. Okay. So one is look at the cookie class. There are cookies, there are different, whether cookie is secure or not. Okay, so to create a cookie, simple thing, constructor with name and value. Okay, so key value pair, that's what I was mentioning. Okay, as far as methods of a cookie class are concerned, we have methods to, okay, cookie can have a comment. So there is a, see, there is a get method as well as a set method. Get method is useful when it is coming from a request. Set method useful when you are adding it to the response. So you might create a response and then you can say, okay, set a comment for it. Set the domain, whether it is for the domain level, host level, as mentioned, right? Okay, this cookie is for the domain. Set HTTP only, fine, sets a flag. So these are, what is the age of the cookie? So after that time, okay, fine. So you can specify in number of days. I think this is, oh sorry, in number of seconds. So for how many, once it is set, so for how many seconds this cookie is valid. So you can set the age of a cookie. Okay, you can set it as a path level cookie, URL. Okay, secure, fine. You can change the value of the cookie. You can set the cookie has versions. So these are setter methods which can be there. Okay, cookie in the constructor you are giving the key and the value both, but value can be changed later by using the set method. But this setter methods will be useful when you are using it on the servlet response object. HTTP servlet response. When it is the request, you have received it, okay, you will be using the getter methods. Okay, so you can get information from the cookie itself. Fine. Comment, domain, name and value. What is most important to us is the name of the cookie and the value for the cookie. Okay. Fine. And the method which we have is the in the request we have a method called getCookies, and okay, so cookie related only one method here in the HTTP servlet request, whereas in the HTTP servlet response, okay, let's look at the method. Oh, you have the method called addCookie. Fine. So this is what should be used. Okay, so you use the addCookie method. Okay. And so cookie related method, add cookie in the response. That is for setting a cookie on the client. So when you are giving a response, fine, servlets are server side. So when you are giving a response to the client, you should be able to set up a cookie on the server. Okay, but so for that you first create an object of cookie, fine, set the various attributes and then call the add cookie method. Okay, when the response goes, there will be appropriate headers created so that the client will be able to would be setting up the cookie value. Fine. And subsequently any request which comes from this client to the server, okay, it should normally be containing the cookie unless the user there has actually in his cookie management he might have got rid of the cookie or something like that. He might have deleted it, or the cookie may have expired, right? So there is a max age which you can set on the cookie. Fine. Clear? Okay, I think we can continue in our next session. Unless, yeah, you have any questions?
No,
If you know any particular topic, any particular thing, if you feel is not understood, you can ask me to repeat. Fine, do not hesitate. Okay.
sure.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So if no questions, then we can continue. Yeah. Next, when we'll have the next session? Today is Tuesday. So
Today is the Tuesday,
yeah.
but like Friday is our exam.
Achha,
So maybe
oh, Friday is an exam. Oh, Friday it's a theory exam, a practical exam.
yeah, here.
Theory. Okay, okay.
So maybe sir, the next Friday, Saturday will be lecture in here.
Achha, this Friday, Saturday we will not have. That means, right?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, fine.
Because both day we have exam. Three and
Achha.
four.
So I think, and when does your Diwali vacation start?
Our verification sir is after 8.
Okay. So I think we may have to take sessions that time also. I think
8 of the November to 20th November.
8 to 20. Okay. Fine. So I think we can take sessions that time, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Fine. And I'll see if I can also give you some material related to JDBC. Okay. I have not taken JDBCs, but I'll try to see if I can manage something for you. Okay. Just similar to what I've done as servlets.txt, same way. If anyone has that access to my book, The Class of Java, it may be there, in library also. Just check that. Okay. There is a chapter, I think chapter number 22 or 23, which is on JDBC. There's one chapter on JDBC. So if you want, you can read that also, or I will share that here. Okay. I'll share that chapter from the book.
Okay, sir.
Okay. Okay. So have a nice day, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.